Wife's secret handyman crush revealed. Dan, a handyman, showed up at the door at 5 p.m. and knocked. When the door opened, he was almost speechless. The woman who opened it was simply stunning. Slender, tanned, with long curly brown hair. She wore a white silk shirt, buttoned up to reveal her cleavage, cropped denim shorts, and a pair of fur boots. The shorts showed off her main asset, her stunning legs. Long and shapely, tanned and trim. "Hi, I'm Dan, handyman. You called about the house renovation," he stammered. She smiled and looked him over from head to toe. She noted that he looked quite trim in his faded jeans and gray t-shirt. "I'm Natalie. Come on in and I'll show you where the problems are." He followed her into the spacious house. He knew a thing or two about quality homes, and this was definitely a nice house. He mentally added 10% to the bill. He followed the attractive woman to the stairs and then up them, trying hard not to stare at her stunning legs and body. Trying hard not to stare, but trying hard to look. "I'm having trouble in the master bathroom," she said, turning slightly and catching his gaze on her legs. "Okay, I'm pretty good with bathroom problems," he said, and immediately felt like an idiot. She bestowed a wry smile on him again. "I might have a problem with the master bedroom, too," she said. He didn't say anything back to that, not knowing if it was a joke or something else. They went up the stairs and she led him into the bathroom, an impressive modern spa with a large glass shower and jacuzzi tub. "Very nice," he said, belatedly realizing he'd said it out loud. "Thank you," she replied. "Here's the first problem. There's a lump of something on one piece of tile. I think it's mortar or grout or something." She pointed to a spot on the floor and then crouched on the edge of the tub to observe. Dan reached into his toolbox and pulled out a putty knife. Kneeling down, he poked the putty knife into the lump a few times and it popped to the surface clean as a whistle. "Well, that was quick," Natalie said, admiring his body. "I don't know why my husband couldn't do it, except that he's never home, he's always working late, sometimes until 7, 8 o'clock. Dan felt a strange sense of foreboding and felt himself starting to get nervous. He began to think that maybe something was going on. He leaned back on his knees and looked at her. "No problem. Maybe there was something else going on?" She looked at him for a moment, then nodded. "Looks like there's water leaking under the sink. I've heard it before when I took a bubble bath," she said, looking at the tub. Dan walked over and looked at it. The only way to get into the right position was to lie on his back with his head resting against the cabinet. When he got into position, his t-shirt pulled up and exposed his abs, and seeing Natalie looking at him admiringly, he silently thanked himself for his daily sitting exercise. It didn't take him long to see the problem with the sink. "I think this valve is loose," he said. "Could you hand me that blue key?" Natalie took the key, then knelt down, straddling one of his legs, and held the key out to him. She could have just handed it to him, but instead she opted to practically climb on top of him. But he didn't mind. On the contrary, he began to have an attraction to her. "Where's the valve here?" she asked, leaning over so that her head was also in the closet. Their bodies were close enough to exchange heat, but not quite touching. Dan began to think something was going on. He pointed to the loose valve and showed her how to use a wrench to tighten the connection. She continued to sit on top of him, watching him tighten the valve, and did so very slowly. As he tightened, he couldn't escape the feeling that perhaps someone had loosened the valve on purpose. "Good, it's tight," he said. "Good. Tight is good," she smiled, but was still in no hurry to get out of the closet and get off him. "I'm sure my husband could do it. He's just really busy at work these days." Dan was really starting to feel like something was going on. He tried desperately to come up with a clever phrase, but he couldn't. "Well, that's too bad. I'm sure you miss him." "Yes, I do miss him," Natalie said. And at that moment her gaze moved down and stopped on Dan's lower body, stopping long enough to make him uncomfortable. So, is there anything else? He asked. Yes, yes, there is, she replied with a sly look. Dan felt a cold sweat break out on him. Here we go, he thought. I have a space in the paneling boards that needs to be filled, she said, pointing to the wall. Dan sighed with either relief or disappointment. He wasn't sure. This woman was very sexy, but she was married and her husband could come home. He was just lucky he'd get in early tonight. Okay, I can just plaster it on and it'll be fine, he said. I'm sorry, did you say you were going to putty it? She asked. He blushed. Putty? You use a caulking gun to fill in the cracks with white putty. Oh my, she smiled. Do you have a caulk gun? He blushed again, harder this time. He pulled a caulking gun out of his toolbox and showed it to her. Caulk gun, he said, realizing that her repetition of the mispronunciation had caused him to mispronounce the word too. Caulk gun. He tried again. I mean caulk gun. So you're going to take this gun, stick it in the gap, and fill it with a white substance, she said. Dan couldn't speak, so he nodded. For a moment he lost track of what he was doing and pulled the trigger of the slot-filling gun, letting the white putty flow out the end of the gun. I can't wait to see it, Natalie said, sat down on the edge of the tub and stretched out her long, gorgeous legs for him to see. Dan could hardly concentrate enough to apply caulk to the trim. Natalie's posture allowed him to admire her legs while he worked, and he took his time. She seemed to have undone another button on her blouse, and he could see a very shapely breast. He was really starting to think something was going on. Eventually, he reached a point where he couldn't procrastinate any longer, and he had to admit that he was done. Okay, it's done, he said. Well, that was impressive, Natalie purred. I guess you can never have too much work. Dan's head spun. Yes, ma'am, I guess I do, he stammered. So is there anything else? She looked at the shower. I think there's something wrong with one of the shower heads, but you won't be able to see it until you're in the shower. She stood up, took off her shoes, walked over and opened the glass shower door. Once inside, she walked to the far edge of the shower stall and turned on the water. Come on in, I'll show you. Dan felt like he was watching someone else, and with a nod, he walked over to the shower stall. He hesitated at the shower door, then bent down and removed his shoes. You might want to take off your pants if you don't want them to get wet, Natalie said affectionately. Dan looked down at his jeans. He reached for the button and stopped. What time did you say your husband would be home? He asked. She grinned evilly. He always works late. He always calls just before he gets home to let me know he's on his way and stopped at the grocery store to buy a copy of the Wall Street Journal. Then he asks if he needs to pick up anything. It takes him an hour to get home after the call. Dan studied her carefully. Does he always call? Always, she replied. And that takes an hour? At least. Dan lowered his gaze to his hands, which rested on the button of his jeans. He was really starting to think something was going on. All away, he thought. He unbuttoned his pants, zipped them up, and pulled them down, not even trying to hide his arousal. He stepped into the shower in a t-shirt and boxers. He stood on one side of the shower jets and Natalie on the other. Natalie looked him over from head to toe, paying particular attention to his attraction to her, and then returned her attention to the shower head. If you look closely, you can see that one of the nozzles is pointing the wrong way, she said, leaning over. She got too close, and the warm water from the shower head splashed them both. She giggled, and he laughed. You mean this one, he said, raising his hand and pointing to part of the shower head. His hand directed the warm water at Natalie, splashing her shirt, which quickly became transparent. She shrieked happily. I think the problem is here, she said, deliberately deflecting the water toward Dan, who took all the spray on his chest. The water ran down into her boxers and dripped down. Maybe it needs a little twist, he said, turning the entire shower head on Natalie, who shrieked in delight. She reached for the hose and turned it on, and in a moment they were both wet and laughing hysterically. In another moment they were both under the shower, warm water running over them both, and then they were kissing. Hesitantly at first, then passionately. Their mouths were ajar, tongues entwined, the water from the shower lubricating the kiss. By now all their clothes were soaking wet, and Natalie pulled his shirt off over his head, and he pulled off her jean shorts. His shirt had yet to fall to the floor when she began kissing his neck and chest and running her hands all over his body. Then she suddenly stepped back and slowly undid the buttons on her wet blouse, exposing her magnificent breasts that Dan had never seen before. She reached up, took some soap from the shelf and poured some onto her breasts, rubbing it into them while he stood there as if mesmerized. The sensation felt so good that Dan began to fear he might lose control of himself and wanted to repay her before that happened. He lifted Natalie to her feet, pushed her back against the wall and knelt down, straddling her legs and lifting her by her head. After a long and delightful game, Dan began to work his way back up her body, paying special attention to caressing her beautiful breasts. When he reached a standing position, she turned away from him, rested her hands on the wall, and looked up at him again. "I think we should have sex." Dan didn't need to be told twice. He put his hands on her hips and started having sex. He took a bottle of soap from the shelf and poured it on her back. He rubbed the soap into her shoulders and back. Slowly pulling away from the incredible high, he somehow pulled himself together and lowered her. She turned to face him, a huge, satisfied smile shining on her face. She scooped some soap from the bottle into her hand and dutifully washed him. "You know, I'll probably find something to fix in my bedroom," she said. "Are you good at fixing bedroom problems, too?" About half an hour later, after Dan had dealt with the various problems in the bedroom, they were lying together on the bed, her head resting on his shoulder. "Wow," Natalie said. "That was really something." "Yes, it was," he replied. "Something amazing and more." She kissed his chest and let out a long, slow sigh. "You know what would make it even better?" she asked. "What exactly?" he answered. "Butter pecan ice cream," she said. I guess you're right. That would be better," he grinned. "So why don't you go to the grocery store and get some?" she said. "Sure, I'll do that right now," he said, as he got up and pulled on his pants and shirt. As he walked toward the bedroom door, she called out to him. "Oh, one more thing, dear," she said. "What's that, dear?" "Don't forget to pick up your Wall Street Journal." The end. Subscribe to my channel. Thank you.